My name is Sarah. I'm 25 years old. Before I share what happened that night, I want to give you some context. I've always been curious, especially about abandoned places. I just couldn't resist exploring them. But this time, things were different. I decided to go to an old, deserted house with a group of friends. It was located far from the city, deep in a wooded area. The house had been abandoned for years, and no one had lived there for what seemed like an eternity. The feeling of isolation and mystery drew us in, but little did we know what we were truly stepping into. As we approached the house, the air grew colder, and the silence was almost suffocating. We entered cautiously, and the heavy wooden door creaked shut behind us. That's when I felt the first wave of unease. Everything inside felt off, unnatural. My friends were laughing and joking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We wandered through the house, stepping over old rugs and furniture covered in dust. Then we reached an old mirror hanging on the wall. It was cracked and the glass was uneven, but I still saw my reflection. Or at least, I thought I did. The reflection didn't move the way I did. It smiled at me, a twisted, unnatural smile that didn't belong to me. I stepped back quickly, heart pounding. My friends noticed my distress and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. Suddenly, everything felt heavier, darker. My friends' voices faded, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath. The mirror fogged over, and when it cleared, I saw something behind me, shadows moving in the reflection. People, faces I didn't recognize, staring at me with hollow eyes. "Get out!" I finally managed to scream, but when I turned around, the room was empty. Still trembling, I stumbled toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to close in on me. I heard whispers, low and haunting, all around. A voice, deep and raspy, whispered my name, Sarah. Desperate, I tried to escape through a window, but even that was sealed shut. Panic set in, and I knew there was no way out. The mirror flickered, showing that same distorted reflection, but this time, something was behind it. Something watching, something waiting. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was alone. The house was silent and the heavy darkness had lifted. My friends were gone. Only a cracked mirror and an eerie stillness remained. To this day, I can't explain what happened to them or why I was the only one left. But every night I relive that moment. The twisted reflection, the whispers, the fear, it's never far from my thoughts. And every time I hear my own voice echoing in an empty room, I can't help but wonder, was it really just a dream? The group of four returning from vacation, the gas station restroom. It was a long and exhausting journey home for Melis and her three friends. After spending days enjoying their vacation, the late-night drive was taking its toll on them. The deserted highway stretched ahead, the only company being the occasional flicker of a street lamp or the sound of tires against the empty road. Hours passed with nothing but darkness and silence. Suddenly, in the distance, they spotted a gas station glowing dimly under the flickering yellow light. The station appeared abandoned, its pumps cracked and rusted, the surrounding area eerily silent. Despite their unease, they decided to stop for a quick bathroom break. Melis was the first to enter the gas station's restroom. The moment she stepped inside, an unnatural chill ran down her spine. The fluorescent light flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the peeling walls. The restroom was empty, save for a single mirror hanging above the sink. As she washed her hands, she noticed something strange in the reflection, an outline of a figure standing behind her. When she turned, the figure was gone. The restroom felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in, and a faint, raspy voice whispered her name from the corners of the room. Outside, her friends waited anxiously in the car. They hadn't seen Melis come out for a while, and the more they waited, the more nervous they became. Suddenly, the sound of screaming pierced the silence. It was a shrill, haunting scream that seemed to come from deep within the restroom. The second friend rushed in, but the moment he stepped through the door, the gas station vanished. Instead, the restroom morphed into a warped, endless corridor, lined with mirrors that reflected grotesque, twisted versions of himself. Every reflection was distorted, some smiling eerily, others screaming silently. The third friend followed, and what he saw was beyond comprehension. The room wasn't empty anymore. Shadows with no faces began to crawl out from the corners, their inky hands reaching for him. He tried to run, but the floor beneath him shifted like quicksand, dragging him down into darkness. The last friend, panicked and desperate, struggled to open the door. It wouldn't budge. The restroom had become a nightmarish labyrinth, filled with whispers and distant, agonized cries. He banged on the walls, his voice hoarse from shouting, but no one responded. When morning arrived, the gas station was abandoned. No trace of Melis or her friends remained. Only shattered mirrors and flickering lights were left behind. Locals tell tales of the restroom, a place where time bends and horrors manifest, where anyone who enters is lost forever in a dimension of terror. Legends speak of the restroom at night, a place where whispers echo endlessly, and the sounds of footsteps are heard long after the last soul has vanished. The gas station remains a chilling reminder of a nightmare that never ends. The dark forest, the lost night. Serap and her friends took a detour on their way back from the weekend trip, turning onto an old village road as the sun began to set. Night was falling fast and cell phone signals were weak. The forest roads twisted and turned, and an eerie silence surrounded them. Everyone felt uneasy, though no one openly admitted their fear. As they reached an old stone bridge, they spotted a derelict, crumbling church beside it. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step closer to the church. Silence seemed to press down on them, making it hard to breathe. Still, no one wanted to turn back. When they entered the church, they saw an ancient stone structure covered in moss and dust. The inside was dark and cold, with no electricity to illuminate their way. One of Serap's friends suggested using their phone flashlights. The church's stone floor was covered with worn, weathered gravestones. Each stone had names etched in them, but time had almost erased them. The oppressive silence was only broken by the echo of their footsteps. Suddenly, one of Serap's friends found a heavy wooden chest. The chest was old, its wood decayed and fragile. When they opened the chest, an old, tattered journal emerged. The pages were torn and fading, but some entries were still legible. There is a dark presence in these lands. It watches, waiting. Serap's hands trembled as she held the journal. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's just an old journal," her friend replied, though his tone was hesitant. The church grew darker and more oppressive with every passing second. The vaulted ceilings loomed overhead, oppressive and suffocating. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out. The church was engulfed in total darkness. A whispering voice filled the void. It came from deep within the forest, unnatural and haunting. Serap huddled into a corner, feeling as though the carvings on the wall were watching her. The whispers became clearer, louder. "You can't leave. You're one of us now, forever." One of her friends screamed, but the sound was abruptly cut off. Panic surged through Serap as she called out to the others, but there was no response. They had vanished. She was alone. Serap pressed against the cold stone wall. The temperature plummeted rapidly, and a chilling sensation enveloped her. The carvings on the wall seemed to come to life, eyes opening as if watching her every move. The whispers intensified, growing louder and more menacing. "You must join us. The dark never ends." Her friend's voice echoed, but it was distorted, unnatural. Suddenly, the journal's words played in her mind again. "You are ours now." Serap's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to run, but the doors had vanished. Instead, the walls of the church closed in around her. Eyes, countless eyes, blinked and stared at her, their pupils following her every movement. The oppressive voice boomed. "You took what was ours." The walls began to bleed, seeping red into the cracks. The floor beneath her feet became slippery with dark, thick liquid. The air grew colder, suffocating her. Serap screamed as the eyes blinked faster, their grins widening. The voice deafened her, shaking the very foundation of the church. She fell to her knees, defeated by the overwhelming terror. When morning arrived, villagers found the church abandoned. Serap's phone and journal were the only remnants left behind. Yet, whispers of the haunting presence persisted, echoing through the surrounding forest. "We're still watching. You'll return. We haven't forgotten." It started at the bartender's smile. "My name is Mike. I'm 30 years old. I'm 38, and this happened to me a few years ago in a bar in downtown New York. I still think about it sometimes, especially late at night when the city falls silent. It was a cold winter evening when I walked into the Hollow Flask, a small, dimly lit bar tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The place had an old, rustic charm to it, with dark wooden furniture and flickering candlelight on each table. The bartender, a man in his mid-40s with sharp features and a cold smile, greeted me with a nod as I ordered a drink. I found a seat near the window and let the buzz of the city fade into the background. The room was nearly empty, except for a few other patrons sitting quietly at the other end of the bar. It was peaceful, at least for a while. As I sipped my whiskey, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the bartender. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and his gaze lingered a little too long on the customers, as if he was studying us. I shrugged it off and focused on my drink. But then things started to get strange. Midway through my second drink, I noticed a figure seated alone at the bar, dressed entirely in black, hood drawn low over their face. They seemed out of place, as if they didn't belong. The bartender glanced at them once and then quickly looked away, his expression stiff. Soon, I heard hushed whispers drifting from that corner of the bar. It was hard to make out what they were saying, but the words sent chills down my spine, like they weren't meant for anyone to hear. The bartender poured a drink for the mysterious figure, setting it down gently in front of them. Without a word, they reached out and took the glass, their fingers unnaturally long and pale against the dark glass. I felt my breath catch in my throat and my heart began to race. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The bartender looked at me, his smile growing wider, but there was something unsettling about it. "That's not a good idea," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost hypnotic. "You might not want to know what happens next." Before I could process his words, the mysterious figure raised their glass and downed the drink in one smooth motion. The room grew colder, the air heavier. The other patrons at the bar began to vanish, their faces melting into shadows. Suddenly, the bartender's smile twisted into something far darker, far more sinister. His eyes, once cold and calculating, became empty, void-like. He leaned in close, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "You should leave, now." I bolted from my seat, adrenaline surging through me. But the door wouldn't open. It was locked. Panic surged as I clawed at the handle, screaming for help, but no sound came out. Behind the bar, the mysterious figure was standing now, their hood thrown back to reveal a face that wasn't quite human, deformed, half-rotted, with hollow eyes. They turned to me, their smile widening into something grotesque, and they began to move slowly towards me. I couldn't escape. The room closed in, the darkness swallowing everything. And as I fell into it, the last thing I heard was the bartender's cold, haunting laugh echoing in the distance. When I woke up, I was alone. The bar was empty, the lights flickering eerily, but the whispers lingered in my ears, and I knew I'd never forget that night. Never forget the hollow flask. My name is Ethan. I'm 32 years old, and this event happened a few years ago at the famous Willow Creek Market, a large supermarket in New York. That day, I went to the market for groceries, but when I returned, I felt like I had stepped into another world. The market was crowded as usual, with people going about their shopping. But with each step I took, I felt something off. The people were normal. The aisles were orderly, but something was missing, as if everyone had been disconnected from reality. They moved robotically, detached from the world outside. I pushed my shopping cart towards the dairy section. That's when I saw them. A pair of eyes watching me, doing nothing else. Deep, dark, completely empty eyes. They were cold, devoid of emotion. Sudden fear washed over me. Those eyes weren't just watching, they were studying, silent, motionless. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on my task, but that unsettling feeling wouldn't leave. As I moved towards the checkout, I noticed those eyes again. They were everywhere now. It was like the people weren't truly present anymore, only their hollow shells were there. Other customers, the cashiers, everything seemed real, but something had shifted. It was like being in a void. At the checkout counter, I saw something strange on the cashier's face. Her eyes weren't focused on the transaction, but somewhere else. Not at an object, but towards something more abstract, something unnatural. "Is someone else here?" I asked, but no one responded. My voice echoed silently. I grabbed my shopping bags and quickly left the market. Outside, the darkness felt oppressive. I kept scanning the streets, looking for those eyes, but nothing was there. Yet that feeling, The fear, the emptiness, remained. I haven't dared to return to that market since. Those eyes haunt my thoughts, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting. The hidden cult in the city. The city had always been a place of constant activity, where lights never went out and the line between night and day blurred. But within the city, a sinister secret lurked. Ancient symbols etched into the walls of old buildings whispered of a hidden cult that had operated for decades, working in the shadows through secret pacts with influential families. Now, their influence was growing stronger. Mysterious disappearances, unsolved murders, and chilling whispers carried by the cold city winds. Everyone knew of these dark secrets, yet no one dared confront them. Jessica was a young journalist who had made it her mission to uncover the truth. For days, she pored over old records, books, and testimonies, piecing together the cult's history. With every step, she uncovered more questions than answers. The stories people told were becoming reality. Jessica knew something malevolent was at work. One night, she stumbled upon an old cemetery where she discovered a mysterious diary. The pages were filled with detailed plans of brutal killings and the dark rituals of a cult that thrived in secrecy. As Jessica flipped through the diary, she felt a presence watching her. She wasn't alone. The night air grew heavier, and in an instant, a shadowy figure appeared before her. Silent yet unsettling, its gaze fixed on Jessica with an eerie intensity. "You must join us." The figure whispered with a voice that sent chills down her spine. "Become one of us, and we will control the fate of the city." Jessica screamed, struggled, but the shadow's grip tightened. The darkness engulfed her, and when she awoke the next morning, her apartment was empty. No trace of her remained. Her friends and family searched, but Jessica had vanished. Throughout the city, whispers spread of a cult that manipulated the shadows to carry out their murderous plans. Over the following year, several more young individuals disappeared without a trace. Each case followed a similar pattern: rituals, sacrifices, and an eerie silence that consumed the city. Nobody knew when the next victim would be taken. The fear hung heavy in the air, and even those who weren't targeted began to feel the cult's influence. Ancient rituals and dark teachings spread as the cult's grip on the city tightened. Jessica's story was only the beginning. The city was now a place where fear was a constant companion, and the cult's dark powers controlled its every move. The whispers in the house. Megan was filled with excitement as her family moved into a new home in the remote mountainous town of North Carolina. The house, an old farmhouse, had been untouched for years, yet it held a certain charm. However, the locals warned of strange occurrences. Rumors spread about eerie whispers heard during late hours. Megan dismissed these stories as superstition, but soon, her own experiences would prove otherwise. A few days after moving in, Megan began noticing strange happenings. In the middle of the night, she would wake up to faint whispers. "Megan, wake up!" The voices would say softly, coming from nowhere. One night, while taking a shower, Megan noticed her reflection in the steamed-up mirror. Instead of her own face, a pale woman appeared. Her lips moved silently, whispering incomprehensible words. Megan wiped the mirror, but the woman's face didn't disappear. It slowly faded away when Megan turned her head, but she couldn't shake the chill. This was only the beginning. One evening, Megan lay awake in her bed when her bedroom door creaked open slowly. A faint red light seeped through the crack, and the room grew icy. Megan felt an unnatural weight pressing down on her. She could feel a cold hand on her back. Terrified, she opened her eyes to see a tall, slender woman standing at the foot of her bed, her face gaunt and expressionless. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. Panicking, Megan screamed. The figure vanished immediately. However, this wasn't the end. In the following days, Megan's sleep became more disturbed. Every night, the same pale figure appeared, whispering incomprehensible words, her voice haunting Megan's dreams. Megan searched the house for answers, but couldn't find any clues. One afternoon, while wandering the garden, Megan stumbled upon an old wooden chest. Inside, she discovered a dusty journal. The entries revealed the chilling history of the previous owner. Her experiences mirrored Megan's. The last page read, "If you're reading this, it's already too late. The house watches you, and it will claim you." As Megan read, the temperature in the room dropped. The same pale figure appeared again, its silent whispers filling the room. Megan screamed, but her voice was lost in the darkness. The following night, Megan couldn't escape. The whispers grew louder, and the house seemed to tighten around her. She struggled to breathe, her vision blurring as the figure closed in. Her body gave out, and everything turned black. The next morning, Megan's room was found empty, with only the old journal and a faint trace of red light. The townspeople avoided the house entirely, haunted by the stories they couldn't explain. Some still say they hear whispers coming from the house late at night, stay forever. The Shadows of Ravenwood. Sarah moved to a small town in northern Pennsylvania, drawn by the promise of peace and solitude. The house she bought was an old Victorian mansion, isolated at the edge of the woods, surrounded by miles of dense forest. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the house and its previous owner, an eccentric artist who disappeared mysteriously years ago. Sarah was eager to restore the place to its former glory, unaware of the darkness still lingering within its walls. The first night was peaceful. The moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the grand halls. But by morning, Sarah knew something was wrong. The rooms felt oppressive. The air felt thick, as if something was watching her. Over the next few days, Sarah began to notice strange occurrences. Items moved on their own, furniture shifted slightly, books were found out of place, and whispers echoed through the hallways. Each night, the noises grew louder, as if unseen presences were following her every move. Then she found the basement. It was hidden behind a heavy wooden door in the back of the mansion. Inside, the walls were lined with faded photographs of people she didn't recognize, faces twisted in torment, their eyes hollow. At the center of the room was a leather-bound journal, filled with disturbing sketches and writings in an ancient, unfamiliar language. Sarah couldn't understand the language, but the images spoke for themselves. They depicted horrific rituals, sacrifices, symbols smeared with blood, and dark figures watching from the shadows. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, feeling a cold dread creep up her spine. One night, the whispers turned into voices. A man's voice, cold and commanding. "Sarah, come to me." Terrified, she fled from the mansion, driving into the night, but the voice followed her. It whispered her name in every corner of her mind, each syllable slicing through her sanity. When she returned home, the house had changed. The atmosphere was thicker, darker. Shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, whispering secrets from the corners of the rooms. And then the visions began. She saw him, the man from the journal, tall, with a pale, lifeless face and eyes void of emotion. He appeared in her dreams, in reflections, and even when she looked away from mirrors. The man wasn't dead. He had been alive, feeding off fear and pain, and now he had her. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace, the room grew colder. The shadows on the walls writhed, stretching towards her with impossible speed. The man appeared, standing inches from her, his voice a low, guttural whisper in her ear. "Your time has come." Sarah tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The man's hands reached for her, cold as ice, pulling her into the darkness. The mansion echoed with a chilling laughter, Sarah's last scream swallowed by the abyss. The next day, the mansion was quiet once more. Visitors found only her belongings, abandoned as if she had vanished into thin air. The journal lay open on the basement floor, her name written over and over again in the dark, ancient script. The townspeople knew the truth. Sarah hadn't left the mansion. She had become part of its haunting history. Whispers still fill the mansion, but now they carry a new message. Welcome home. The Whispering Pines. Lucy had always been drawn to the quiet, sleepy town of Blackwood in Northern California. Her dream was to escape the chaos of the city and start fresh in a small, peaceful community. She found the perfect home, a secluded cottage nestled at the edge of the forest, surrounded by towering redwoods. The locals warned her about the house, saying it had a history of strange occurrences, but Lucy brushed them off. She was determined to make the place her own. The first few weeks were idyllic. The cottage was charming, the forest was beautiful, and the town seemed to embrace her warmly. But as the days passed, Lucy began to sense something was off. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, a soft, unnerving whispering that seemed to be just beyond hearing. Doors would creak open on their own, and her belongings would be found in different rooms, as if someone had been searching through them. One evening, Lucy was unpacking a box when she stumbled upon an old photo album. Flicking through the pages, she saw a family she didn't recognize, silent, shadowy figures with hollow eyes and thin, pale faces. The more she looked, the more they seemed to stare back at her. Her breath hitched as she noticed the names beneath the pictures. Her name, her parents' names, and other relatives who had lived in the house long before her. That night, the whispers grew louder. Lucy could hear them clearer, vivid, sinister voices that spoke her name in unison. Lucy, join us. The room grew colder. Shadows flickered across the walls, taking on grotesque shapes, deformed, twisted figures with clawed hands and elongated limbs. Lucy fled to the attic, barricading the door with furniture, but the whispers followed her. In the attic, she found a collection of old journals written by the house's previous occupants. Each entry revealed a dark secret, the family's descent into madness and rituals they performed to invoke a demonic force. It became clear that the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was possessed by something far worse, a malevolent entity that fed on fear and pain. The next night, as Lucy lay in her bed, she felt the oppressive presence beside her. A figure materialized in the shadows, human in shape, yet grotesque, with hollow eyes and a wide, twisted grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Why did you come here, Lucy?" it whispered, its voice slithering through her mind. Lucy screamed, but her voice was drowned by the inhuman laughter that filled the room. The figure reached out with skeletal fingers, its grip icy cold as it dragged her into the shadows. The next morning, the cottage was eerily silent. Her car was still parked outside, her belongings untouched. The only thing that remained was a bloodied journal lying open on the attic floor, filled with strange demonic symbols and her name repeated over and over again. The townspeople no longer spoke of Lucy in whispers. They spoke of her in hushed terror. For the house at the edge of Blackwood would never let her leave. The shadows in the house. Emily moved to a small remote town in Ohio with her family. The house they purchased was an old two-story colonial with a dark past. Rumors swirled about the house being cursed, with whispers of dark rituals once performed in the basement. Despite the warnings from locals, Emily was drawn to the mystery, eager to uncover the truth behind the town's eerie stories. The first night in the house was unsettling. Shadows danced along the walls as Emily lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Her parents dismissed her concerns, but Emily knew something wasn't right. The real terror began the second night. As she drifted off to sleep, the room grew colder. Her bedside lamp flickered erratically before going dark. Then the whispers began, low, guttural voices echoing in her mind. "Emily, we've been waiting." Frightened, she tried to call out, but her voice was caught in her throat. The whispers grew louder, twisting into something darker and more sinister. One night, while exploring the basement, Emily found an old, rusted iron box buried beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. Inside, she discovered strange symbols carved into the lid, symbols she couldn't recognize, but instinctively knew were linked to dark magic. Every night after that, the house seemed to change. The air grew heavier, the shadows longer. The once harmless creaks and groans of the old house morphed into something more sinister, inhuman whispers brushing against her ears. Emily's reflection in mirrors began to shift. Her eyes would darken, her smile stretch unnaturally wide. One night, in a dark hallway, she saw her reflection in a cracked mirror. The figure standing beside her wasn't her own. It had hollow eyes and a twisted grin, whispering something that sounded like a chant. Her parents noticed her deteriorating state. Sleepless nights left dark bags under her eyes, and her once lively demeanor was replaced with fear. They urged her to leave, but the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with thoughts that weren't her own. One evening, as Emily tried to sleep, a shadow emerged from the corner of her room. It was human-like, but twisted, its limbs unnaturally elongated, its eyes glinting like fire. It moved closer, its breath hot and stale. "Join us," it hissed, a voice in her mind rather than her ears. "No!" Emily shouted, her voice firm despite her fear. But the creature only smiled wider. That night, Emily could feel her body weakening. Her heartbeat slowed and her vision blurred as the shadow consumed her. In a moment of pure terror, her body slumped into the darkness, her mind lost to the entity's influence. The next morning, her parents found her room empty, the windows blackened with strange symbols etched into the glass. No trace of Emily remained, only whispers echoed through the house, chanting her name in dark, guttural tones. "Emily, join us! Forever."